Hey everyone, it's Matt again. I had another question about what makes a good prompt. And I thought, well, I'd put some things together really quick and I'll shoot a terrible video. So let me show you what makes a good and bad prompt. Let me share my screen quick. All right. So first of all, how do you even think about what a prompt is? So I want to set the stage on that. What I'm going to talk about is how do you actually make a prompt that you can use for things like ChatGPT. So not necessarily a prompt that you would use for, prompt engineering to actually have something in the background that would do a bunch of calls or to power something. But I think the rules still apply. So think about a prompt as basically a set of instructions that you would want to give your chat GPT, for example. And you almost want to write it like you're giving somebody, a human, instructions. You don't know this human, so you need to be very clear. You need to understand how they sort of think about things. So use clear language, but also you want to be very specific about something. So, like when you're giving somebody a task to do, you have to be very, very clear. Imagine you're giving the task to a child. Unless you step it out step by step, they're not going to really understand or they're not going to be successful about it. So you have to be very specific about that. And it really helps if you have context. Build that context inside there so it can give you more of a relevant response. And you can also give it constraints. Give it a box to live in so it knows how to respond. So here's an example. And actually, this one's just fine. It doesn't have enough context, in my opinion, and maybe it doesn't have enough constraints, but here's a good prompt to start with. So create a step-by-step process for gathering customer feedback after a product launch, focusing on how to collect feedback, analyze it, and report it to the findings team. So this is a good place to start to get that step-by-step thing. But what you'll find is that it's probably going to give you a generic response. So you may need to give it a little bit more context. So play around with these qualities of a good prompt. But what makes a bad prompt? And it's not necessarily that the prompt is bad. You just might get a bad response. So, for example, you don't want to have a lot of questions inside there. You can have some steps. That's fine. It could be a complex thing, but you don't want to have multiple questions. And also, don't assume that your chat GPT, unless you've programmed it, knows what you're talking about when if you're using acronyms, or specific language, colloquialisms or short things, whatever. Just don't assume that it knows very specific things. And if you're biased, it'll be biased. So if you're asking it leading questions, it will give you leading responses. So I also want to talk about a couple types of responses that I found, or sorry, types of prompts that I found that are pretty valuable for getting decent responses. And these aren't the only types of prompts that you'll find out there. But these are some pretty good ones. And you can mix and match these. And you'll see that there's going to be some overlap in some of this as well. So the first one is kind of the generic prompt that most people will use, an instruction-based prompt. And you can really use this for ordinary tasks. So if you wanted to create documentation, if you wanted to analyze something, help you create an email, whatever. But in this example of wanting to do a very specific or asking AI to do a very specific task, I'm saying I want you to develop a training module for new team members on the standard operating procedures for product launch planning. It's kind of a mouthful, but you're asking it a very specific thing. It's not a question, it's a task. The next one is more of an open-ended type of prompt. And this one you want to use for exploration. I use this all the time for brainstorming. So if you want to get some ideas on how to do something, open-ended prompts are perfect. And these are generally the question types of things. So an example here, what are some of the innovative ways a company can improve employee engagement in a remote work environment? It'll spit out a bunch of things, give you some ideas that you can go, oh yeah, that might make sense for me. And then this is a great way to kind of refine your prompt once you kind of find something that's suggested to do better. One of my favorite ones is role-based prompts. So this one is actually going to give you a very specific point of view. So, for example, if you're asking somebody that's in product operations or as a product manager, how would you create a product brief or how might you critique the set of features or user story? You can ask it to be that particular person. So in here, you can either say you are a product operations manager, or you can say, imagine your product operations manager outline a strategy for improving blah, 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 blah. The cool thing about this one is you can actually use it to critique its own response. So for example, if you were having it create a documentation for you, you then can put in another prompt to say, imagine that you're a CEO at this organization, review what you just gave me and critique it as a CEO and rewrite it. Pretty cool. And the next one is a contextual prompt. So this is kind of a mix and match one, because before I said you want to have a good prompt, you need to have a lot of context in here. Well, this one really is if you want to get a really good response instead of just a generic one. So that's what this is all about. So the more information that you can give it, the better the response is going to be. And then the last one I was going to talk about is a comparative prompt. So this basically means you want to understand the differences between a few things. Could be two, could be three, pros and cons, could be all different kinds of stuff. But this is really great when you want to understand the differences in something that you are analyzing. So there's a basic idea about prompts. If you want to learn some more, let's nerd out about it. Or if you have any other questions that you're curious about, let me know. I'm happy to talk about it.